Hi there, and welcome to the March edition of BAC-chat. It's all been a little bit rushed this month because we've got a big project on at the moment, so I was very late trying to get guests for this. Thankfully, I am going to be joined by Alan Jones, who I'll introduce in a moment. But first of all, the now obligatory disclaimer. Whilst I do work for the BCIA, the Building Controls Industry Association, and I present training courses. This is not in any way associated with the BCIA, so these are my personal views. This is something that I do as a hobby. So welcome if you're watching live, if you're watching this on the catch-up afterwards, and hopefully you'll find something of interest here. So what I wanted to talk about this week, last month we talked about women in engineering. It was a big topic, and it obviously has a lot of ramifications. It's a very serious topic. This is not so much sort of light-hearted, but it's less heavy. Just want to talk about how we use technology within the BEMS industry, and we're going to start off with an innocuous thing. It's hand-off auto switches, and do we need them? I had hoped to get two guests, but unfortunately I could only get one. Alan is a great fan of not having hand-off auto switches, as am I, so I'm going to play devil's advocate through this. So first off, welcome Alan. Thank you very much for doing this.
Good evening to you all. Yes, as Andy says, I'm Alan Jones, a BMS freelance consultant. Been writing specifications for quite a long time. I've got a view about hand-off auto switches, as Andy suggests. I'm for them on the HMI, not for the rotary switches. I have to admit, not being an end user can be an issue. It's all very well as a consultant to sort of sit back and say, well, why don't we use all the HMI and why don't we use the IoTs? And I can write great words and specifications, but I understand that sometimes people don't want to go down that route, and I can sympathise with that. But I think that in today's technology, when we're quite happy to use our mobile phones for banking and making phone calls and watching videos, there is no reason why we have to use a rotary switch from the front of a panel. We're quite happy to go to the BMS head-end supervisor and touch screens and turn plant on and off. Why should we not have the same attitude when we get to the panel? So that's really, I think that's where we're going. It's not an easy route to go down. I do write specifications without them in, and a lot of BMS companies just put them on. And I say, well, why have you even done that? Well, that's what we always do, they tell me, which is, I'm afraid, is something which we do often say in this industry. But they've got their views about it, and there isn't a right or a wrong. I'm not going to stamp my feet and say I'm the consultant, do as I told you.
I think
that doesn't work. Well, you can't, can you? Because we've all got to do the job. We've all got to do the job, and at the end of the day, we just want to do a job and get on with it. But I think just trying to not drag people to an HMI, but just giving them some of the ideas, that the advantages, particularly these days when an HMI, I'm not going to say they're cheap, but they're relatively cheap. And there are plenty of them on the market now. If you went back 5 years, then having a great big industrial touchscreen PC on the front of your panel was not a practical solution. But with an HMI today, size of a mobile phone, not a lot of good really, but a panel the size of an iPad, they're not terribly expensive. And to me, you've got the advantage that you've got a web browser basically on a BMS. You can web browse straight into your BMS from your HMI. So with that advantage, why would you now want to put rotary switches on the front of the panel? I'm sure Andy's got a view about that, but what my view really at the moment is,
my view is the same as yours, but to actually put that opposing point of view, obviously people do like the comfort of having a nice chunky switch where you just click, and away you go, and it goes into hand. And we're going to look at the broader use of technology within our industry, but the handoff auto switch kind of symbolises how we might be a little bit stuck in our ways, I think. One of the things that people often say about the handoff auto switches is it's fail safe and it's idiot proof. You know, if it says fan to hand, then you switch it to hand and the fan starts. Or does it, Alan, when you switch the fan to hand?
I think you're right. It is idiot proof, and 15 years ago, people wanted idiot-proof switches. There's a much more confidence these days of FM teams. They talk glibly about IoT and analytics and putting things in the cloud, and yet suddenly, when you suggest to them, well, why don't we have a HMI instead of this rotary switch, they all run away from it. If you really want to have something, then you can have something. You could go to your inverter to run that locally if you want. But I think perhaps going back a bit of history, really, why we got the switches to start with, because many, many years ago when we had pneumatics, you put the fan into hand, the fan ran, the DP switch made, allowed the pneumatics to start, and you got temperature control. So you actually got, you could run your plant. But over the years, that's really gone away now, and the test position or the hand position just really runs the fan. It doesn't really give you, some people do, but most people don't give you temperature control. So just turn the fan on is not going to solve your issues. Sure. You could make your handoff auto switch if you want a digital input into the BeMS. You wouldn't know. After all, you turn the switch, you have got no idea what it's really doing behind the doors unless you take it apart. I have done jobs where we've done that. The switch just goes into the BeMS and the BeMS does the job, and you know no more. The logistics of that or geographical problems are things like how does a commissioning team get a fan working early in a job? So you need some means of doing that. That can be difficult. EC motors throw up a problem. Ubiquitous now on air handling plants, and without a 0 to 10 volt signal, it doesn't really matter. You can put your handoff auto switch into hand. I'm afraid your fan is not going to run. So you now rely upon something else. You could put
you very much think we should be along the lines of our cousins in the process control industry, where if you see an automation line, generally there will be a touchscreen interface, usually with a big red stop button, so that if something goes wrong, you have got that comfort there. But really, we should be interfacing, or we should be interacting with our systems just through that HMI, even if it's a set of drawings with start stop on it just to press. There's no reason to have the physical switches.
Well, absolutely. I have got jobs where the graphic is drawn and it's got a handoff auto switch written on it, and you just touch the switch and it does the job. To me, I think there's lots of other advantages of having this software interface. If you put it into hand, very often it gets left running 24/7. People will just forget about it, or they just panic and put things into hand. So if you use a software switch, you can still put it into hand, you can still run the fan. If you want to set the temperature loops going, it's pretty easy to do that. But after 4 or 5 hours, it will just go off again. Yeah. So energy isn't wasted. Why is it in hand to start with? What's the reason for it?
There is, and there is, of course, we do use digital inputs to monitor handoff auto switches so that we get an alarm when we're in hand, which in itself is an irony. So we're actually monitoring the status of an out of auto condition. Why don't we just create that out of auto condition within the BeMS?
Yes. As I say, I think we can offer an HMI now because it's cost effective. The HMI screen is cost effective. I'm not going to suggest you would save money by putting an HMI on and taking the handoff auto switches away. But on the other hand, most controllers are web-based, embedded graphics. So you're not putting graphics into your HMI. You're just using it as a web browser. And I've got 1 or 2 jobs now where we're not even putting a screen on the front. We're just giving them a URL via a QR code, which we stick on the front of the panel, and it takes us straight into that controller via a local network. So you don't even have a switch. You don't need a panel now. Okay, there might be cyber security issues at that point in time, but cross those bridges somewhere else. But you just rock up with your mobile phone, find the network, and you're in. And as I said, because of BMS, most BMSs are web-based. They're accessed via a browser. Once you're into the system, you can just go off wherever you want. You can be in the basement plant room and find out what the cooling towers are doing. And so a hand-off photo switch itself is important, but making use of the HMI for other things begins to give you much more access to your plant, and you just don't need to worry about those switches any longer.
I have no opposing view for this, guys. You've sold me. I'm going to have a word with Dave, and we're never going to use hand-off auto switches again. Just moving on from this, another thing that we briefly talked about was the use of bus networks. So modernising the way we do things. And again, I would go to process control for this, where you have different parts of a production line, and it's what Modbus was originally invented for, was to link those pieces of process plant together. And we still don't do that, and I want to think specifically about variable speed drives. Now you've got a very complicated piece of equipment, or complex piece of equipment should I say, and it is capable of bus technology, and yet we have all of these hardwired points in and out of it. Now I know you were saying about the safeties, but do you think there's merit in rather than constantly starting them with a signal, that maybe we could actually just use those bus signals, or do you think it's not reliable enough for that?
I think one has to think about jobs, to be honest with you, specific jobs. If you've got a process plant, you might have 10,000 motors around on a conveyor belt, exaggeration. You might have 100. Yeah. And to run hardwired signals to that is quite complicated. In most building services jobs, if you've got 10 pumps in a plant room, you've got an awful lot. And so if you put those 10 pumps onto one Modbus network, fine, everything's working tickety-boo. But if that interface fails, which it can do, not often, but it can do, you are a bit stuck now. So now you've got to go back. So I think, yes, it's certainly a thing to think about, but I'm not that confident as a consultant of going down that route, because I can see, I don't know, a few issues coming that trip me up. And we're not in the business of being tripped up, I'm afraid. And we don't mind being innovative, but being tripped up is not what we want to do. Yeah. So I think, and you still got to wire hardwired safety interlocks out to these bits of kit, whether it's a damper end switch or a pressurization unit or even a fire interlock. So you've already got cabling going over there. So taking a 2-core or 4-core or 6-core, it's not going to cost you any more money. I agree, it will cost you points in your panel, physical points in your panel, which you're paying for, and a license and all that sort of caper. But if you look at the cost of a job, what's a controller? Maybe 10% of a contract value. So, even if you get the controller free, it's still going to cost you 90% of the job. So I don't think that saving points at that level is important. Maybe if you've got lots of separate plant rooms and lots of drives, it might become cost effective, but I think I've got a long way to go before I can go down the route of saying, let's go for it. I mean, I will admit I did try it on one job, but I did get cold feet halfway through and backed out. So
we've actually just done this recently with speed control. Rather than 0 to 10 volt signals for the speed, we've got bus signals to do the speed control. And there's a couple of things that we're finding. The first one is there is lag on the system, which might just be the type of controls we've got. These are going to Grundfos pumps. So we send a signal out, and it takes a little while before it starts responding to that. The other thing is, and we sort of talked about this before we came on air, was fail-safe. How do you set your fail-safe position? Or do you think if we're going down this route, we should maybe understand the need for a fail-safe position more than we do now, and give it more credence, because if that bus network does fail, we need the fallback position.
Yeah. Okay. So you could have your fail-safe condition if you want in your inverter. If it can't communicate, you can say, okay, just run at 25 hertz or 37 hertz or whatever value you want. And within a normal building services situation, I don't think that's going to cause you a problem. It may after 2 or 3 days it will, but one hopes you've solved this problem, because it's something you need to solve quick. So you can have a fallback. I just, as I say, I feel uncomfortable about having only this controller, because if this controller, I don't like to name people, but if you've got a SIP, which is a lot of people go for, it's a one-off device, and if that device fails, you've got 6 motors connected to it. Not a great idea. Conversely, if you've got a controller that's got a Jace, if you like, that's got a Modbus output on it, it's less likely to fail, because it's now a component of the whole of the bigger control system. So perhaps it's more, but I still think you could be putting your eggs in one basket at that point in time.
Yeah. I think that's more the nature of Modbus than it is the equipment. I mean, well, you don't want to lay any criticism at the SIP. It's a great product.
No.
But with Modbus, you have that master-slave architecture. So if the master fails, the networks fail. That's the nature of Modbus, isn't it? So
yes.
There is that particular nuance to it, although it is an extraordinarily simple protocol, having been around since the 1970s. So it is quite robust.
Yes, and in fact, it's quite interesting. Why is it that Modbus has never really got it into the building services? We've been through all the other things, and now we're flying the flag for BAC-net, which popped up out of the woods maybe 10 or 20 years ago or something now. Mm-hmm. But as you say, Modbus it's there, been doing what it's been doing for donkey's years.
Well, having engineered Modbus networks and BAC-net networks, I can see why, definitely. As an engineer, the BAC-net commands who is and the response I am is an absolute godsend when you compare to rolling through loads of Modbus tables trying to work out what register does what, and whether it's a 32-bit signed register or whether it's a 64-bit integer. It's a lot simpler to work with. So I kind of see why those protocols have gone the way they are. But I had someone on one of my training courses once say, Modbus is dead. It's too old, it's gone. And yet here it is, still around. I think it was invented in 1979. So it's quite long in the tooth now, and it's still with us. But of course you can implement it on smaller and smaller devices, so it still has a place. I think maybe, whilst we might be looking at replacing handoff auto switches with HMIs, maybe the comfort in the broader industry is not really there for bus technology to take over completely, where we just string everything together.
It's hard it really is hard, Andy, because I think, I feel it shouldn't happen yet, but technology moves so quickly in this industry that who's to say this time next year, I don't know, software could be living in the cloud for all I know, and just being bombed out to everybody. Why do you want a controller in your building? There's lots of reasons why you do, but why is software so complicated? Because people like I, as a consultant, write complicated strategy in BeMS specifications because it's great fun.
Keeps food on the table, Alan. That's why we do it.
It's great fun, but software as itself will, in my view, will disappear anyway. And it will just be. Well, I think. Yeah. Honest, I think we'll end up with Google or AWS or something.
Well, the first one of these I did was
confidently. You can go back and use your Modbus. Sorry, use your BAC-net out to your fans, because you talk about the speed of response. I don't really think a fan should be changing that much anyway. So what sort of lag are you talking about?
No, in fairness, that is because I am demonstrating this to a consultant, and they say, right, turn the pump up, turn it down, turn it on, turn it off, and you're absolutely right. Under normal conditions, it's just running at whatever speed it's running at. So it's just perceived by me because I want to get the job done.
Well, of course, because I think it's always commissioning is always difficult that you want it to get done now. But
Yes.
in reality, if a signal took 10 seconds or 25 seconds to get to a controller, I don't really think it's going to make a lot of difference. So maybe I'm talking myself back into having HMIs, having bus connected to the inverters because the speed isn't that complicated and a lot of drives just tend to run at a constant speed anyway. I mean, very often, like yourself, you go to plant rooms and you find them running at the same speed, 37 hertz, and they never change. And
Sure.
everybody's quite happy. So, you can hard code these into your inverter.
There is
so
just
you can do
one last thing I just want to talk about is, before we wrap up, and that is something you touched on there, about things changing. My personal view is that we are seeing that the BEMS industry is now merging very much with IT. Everyone seems to recognise that. But my feeling is that we should really be seeing different disciplines within our industry. So a controls engineer, as I am understanding P plus I loops and how plant works, etc., is one part of the job. Putting all the networks together is it's not someone else's job, but it's, if you're going to do it in a specialized way, that is a specialized discipline, as are doing the graphics. Would you share that view?
Oh, 100%. I'm really sorry to say this, but I think a BMS man designing a network is not the way to go. Converged networks provided by network specialists, to me, is the only solution. It's fine when we just had simple networks and BMS just sitting on its own network. It could be looked after by the BMS man and it didn't really matter too much. But everybody wants converged networks for all sorts of good reasons. And that converged network's got to be done by somebody outside the BMS world. There are people who build networks. That's their job.
Sure.
I don't expect them to come along and design a PID loop, but let them do the networks, definitely, because it's not something I think the BMS man should do. I know that BMS people love it and they like to do it, but I don't see it really as their beef, to be honest with you. It's not something which they should get involved in too deeply.
Yeah. Because this is one of the interesting things that's happening at the moment. We're starting to see the BCIA are putting together their Trailblazer scheme for an apprenticeship, which is an awesome scheme. But I think we're getting all of these engineers to do all of these things, and really we're going to see that splitting out and actually people specializing, or hopefully we'll see people specializing. So for example, networks, I mean, some of the networks I see, I'm quite interested in the networking side of it. I wouldn't call myself a networking expert, but daisy chained Ethernet is a particular pet hate of mine. It should all come back to a switch. That's how it should work. I do see that maybe successful companies on large projects will have network experts and controls experts and hopefully graphics experts as well, because I'm terrible at doing graphics. They just never quite look how I want them to. Hopefully we'll see that emerge as this Trailblazer scheme develops, where maybe you end up with a specialism at the end of it.
Oh, well, I think you have to, Andy, because I don't, BMS people are BMS. They design control systems. They're not network designers. Yes, anybody can go and buy a switch and plug an Ethernet cable into it and plug it into a controller, and with a bit of magic can make it talk. But that's about as far as it goes. And networks in buildings are much more complicated than that. Maybe too complicated sometimes, but they're much more complicated. And in the long term, who looks after this network? If the BMS man builds the BMS network and it starts to degrade or fail or something, then he has to go back and fix it. Yes. Whereas if the building is managed by an IT specialist, then he will look after networks. That's his job, to replace switches and upgrade switches and do whatever he does to
or provide the necessary redundancy in the first place.
Well, yeah, that's right. So I think that BMS man they are good at what they do, but I think with best respect to most BMS engineers, companies steer clear of networks, because converged networks, they're just not what we're brought up to do.
Yeah, excellent. Alan, thank you very much for taking time out of your evening to talk to me. I really appreciate it. It was very last minute, and I really appreciate your input into this. It's been a bit of a weird one this month. So I will hopefully be a bit more organised for next month, but thanks very much. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Maybe, who knows, maybe we'll meet up in person when all this lockdown is over.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been great. It's nice to try to talk to the wider world, to give your views, because very often your views are on my specifications or in my private head. And getting it out to other people is important, and I'm sure other people have got views which are completely different to mine, and again, it's great to get the feedback from them, because as engineers we only know our own jobs, and we only ever hear about bad jobs, unfortunately. And it'd be great it's great to get feedback from people who've seen good ideas, because we don't all live in the same box with everybody else. We're all we are silos, unfortunately. So we need feedback from people. So it's really good. Yeah, thanks for the time.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks very much, Alan. And thanks very much for joining us. I know there weren't many people on live stream, but this goes up on YouTube afterwards. We also have a Facebook page where the video goes up, so you will be able to catch this afterwards, and I'll put it on LinkedIn. On the subject of LinkedIn, I wanted to stream live to LinkedIn, but there's an application process for that, and it takes 6 weeks. I'm about 4 weeks into that application, so we may have this live stream on LinkedIn if they decide that they will let us stream live to LinkedIn. But aside from that, thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you next month for another episode of BAC-chat. Thank you.